As you can imagine, Bohemian Rhapsody is full of interesting harmony and techniques, so much so that I'm not going to be able to look at every single detail today. But let's dig into some of those interesting key changes, some of those chord progressions, and some of that trademark chromatic movement. Now, before I dig into the harmony, I wanted to have a quick look at the structure of this song. Bohemian Rhapsody is a rhapsody. A rhapsody is a piece of music, often classical, that is through composed. In other words, it hasn't got any repeating sections, it has an irregular form. For example, whereas a song like Don't Stop Me Now has a structure like this with repeating verses and choruses, Bohemian Rhapsody doesn't return to any of its sections. It's comprised of 5 distinct sections: an a cappella intro, the ballad section, which you might call the verses, the operatic section, the rock section, and then the coda, which you could call the outro. The nearest we get to repetition in this song is within this second section, where the verse-like segment gets repeated, but each time it is repeated, it has a slightly different ending, so there's no pure repetition in this song. So let's start by looking at what's going on in this first section, the a cappella intro. For this video, I've been looking at the original multi-track for Bohemian Rhapsody, so I can look at all of the individual parts and what they're doing. And something that made me smile on these stems is that you can actually hear Freddie counting in the beginning of the song.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Is this the real life?
Bohemian Rhapsody starts with this chord. And already we have a bit of ambiguity. This chord could be G minor 7 or it could be B flat 6. Both of those chords are comprised of the exact same notes. Now, without any wider context, you can't definitively really say whether it's the G minor 7 or the B flat 6, but I feel like this chord has a slightly more minor quality than major, so I'm going to go down the G minor 7 route. So then we move on to the C7.
Is this just fantasy?
We're in the key of B flat, so we should have a C minor, but this C7 is major. And the reason for that is that this is a secondary dominant. The dominant chord is just the 5th chord of the key, so in B flat the dominant chord is F major. But a secondary dominant is the dominant chord belonging to one of the other chords of the key. So C7 is the dominant chord to F. And sure enough, we are taken to F by the C7.
Caught in a landslide.
And then the F7 resolves to a B flat.
Caught in a landslide. No escape from reality.
We even get a final brief 5-1 on the last 2 beats of the bar, really grounding us in to the key of B flat.
Escape from reality.
And that's the thing about Bohemian Rhapsody. We have loads of odd chromatic harmony that we're going to get onto in a while, but Bohemian Rhapsody at its core uses very functional harmony, lots of perfect cadences, lots of secondary dominants to move us around the key, which creates an even bigger contrast when we then do get the odd chromatic chords. They strike a really stark contrast compared to the functional harmony. So now the piano enters and lands us on a G minor chord.
Open your eyes.
And then we get another perfect cadence, this time B flat 7 moving to E flat.
Look up to the skies and see.
Now this perfect cadence and the lines that come after it are interesting. Have we changed key to E flat major here via this perfect cadence, or are we still in B flat? The argument for E flat is that these 2 bars only use notes that are in E flat.
Look up to the skies and see.
However, all of the notes and chords in these 2 bars would also fit in the key of B flat major. The thing is, the keys of B flat major and E flat major are only 1 note different. B flat has an A natural and E flat has an A flat. They are very closely related keys, so it's possible to harmonically straddle the 2 at the same time. The interesting part is when we hit this F7. You could say, well, F7 has an A natural and therefore belongs in B flat major, not E flat. But I would argue that these 2 bars, thanks to this perfect cadence, established E flat as the new root. And this F7 is actually a secondary dominant, like the secondary dominant we had earlier. The thing is, if this F7 was followed by a B flat, which is what you would usually expect from a secondary dominant, it would complete the cadence, and the question of which key we're in would be solved. What I mean is, if the B flat sounded like the root, then we know we are in B flat. And if the B flat sounded like the dominant, the 5th, then we know we're in E flat. And we almost get this resolution. The F7 almost moves to a B flat.
I need no sympathy, 'cause I'm easy come, easy go.
But the B flat is trapped in this chromatic motif. The B flat chord that our ears are looking for is encapsulated by these two chromatic chords on both sides. And this is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that Freddie contrasts functional harmony
Up to the skies and see.
with chromatic movement.
Easy come, easy go.
This chromatic semitone movement up and down keeps appearing in this song.
Easy come, easy go. Little high, little low. I see a little silhouette of a man to the fandango. I'm just a poor boy, nobody loves me. Easy come, easy go. Will you let me go?
And what this motif does is it delays resolution by trapping the note our ears want to hear between two chromatic chords. This Bohemian motif is a fantastic tension builder because our ears really want to resolve to the note in the middle, and yet the melody keeps throwing us off, forcing us to wander deeper into the song in search of the resolution. Next, we get this lovely line cliche.
Any way the wind blows doesn't really matter.
A line cliche is when a chord progression has been voiced in such a way that they're moved down by semitones, creating a really smooth pattern. So for example, here we have this E flat with an E flat in the bass, a B flat chord with a D in the bass, a B flat diminished chord with a D flat in the bass, and then an F with a C in the bass. So we've moved down E flat, D, D flat, C. Next, this F chord gets grounded by having it sounded in the bass as well, so it changes inversion.
Blows doesn't really matter to me.
Spending this extra bar on F major and switching it to the root position helps emphasize it, gives it importance, and then it forms a perfect cadence to this B flat, so it helps us establish that B flat is now the key that we've settled on.
To me.
So now we kick into the second section of the song, this ballad section.
Mama just killed a man, put a gun against his head, pulled my trigger, now he's dead.
We have a very standard functional chord progression, 1, 6, 2, 5. This then repeats again, but the second time around, when we hit the 2 chord, the C minor, it begins another line cliche.
Mama, life had just begun, but now I've gone and thrown it all away. Mama.
This F minor is really cool because we're in the key of B flat, but F minor doesn't belong in B flat major. F minor contains an A flat, not an A natural. What is happening here is we're subtly modulating to the key of E flat major, which does have an A flat. Now we get the same chord progression we had before, the 1, 6, 2, 5, but now it's in the key of E flat. And following that, we enter a different chord progression, 1, 5, 6, and then the minor version of the 4 chord, this A flat minor.
Carry on, carry on, as if nothing really matters.
The A flat minor is chromatic to the key, but it still resolves us nicely to the root of E flat. This is called a minor plagal cadence. A plagal cadence is the move from the 4 chord to the 1 chord. So the minor plagal cadence is just the movement from a minor 4 chord to a 1 chord. This is a classic alternative to a perfect cadence with a far more melancholic sound. So we've resolved to E flat for the end of verse 1. We then get another line cliche. So you would usually expect this progression to move you back to E flat. But instead, Freddie just jumps us up to B flat. The thing is, this F minor is really not the most obvious way to move back to B flat. The most obvious thing to do would be to have an F major here. And it would create a nice perfect cadence back from the F major to B flat. But Freddie has obviously decided not to do this, and I guess it's because it sounds too predictable. This F minor creates a nice jolt back to B flat instead. So the next point of interest I wanted to talk about was at the end of the guitar solo, as it's just about to move into the third section, the operatic section. So we're in the key of E flat major here, but we then get this D flat chord and a B flat minor chord. Neither of these chords belong in our key. They point instead to a new key of A flat major. So right here, it feels like we're about to modulate to A flat major. It feels like we're setting up a modulation. So you can hear what I mean. I've edited the music here. So instead of jumping to an A chord, we move to the A flat. So although it's quite odd to hear that, you can hear how that's quite a pleasant resolution. But of course, Freddie doesn't want this to happen. Instead, he wants us to be knocked right up in our seats to hear the next section. So instead of moving to A flat, which is what he's set up, he moves a semitone higher to A. So this A major chord catches us completely off guard, and coupled with a tempo change and a dynamic change, it really commands our attention, ready to enter the next section. So let's look at this section. We start on a staccato A major chord, establishing the key. But then instantly after that, we start getting this chromatic movement, that Bohemian motif that I mentioned earlier.
I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango?
So even though this operatic section is so different from everything that's happened so far, Freddie is tying it all together by continually returning to this chromatic motif, to this Bohemian motif. So bearing in mind we're in the key of A major, we then suddenly jump to D flat and then A flat.
Thunderbolts and lightning.
So I would call this a key change because we've clearly changed tonality, but it's so fleeting that it doesn't really establish itself as a new key. The D flat and A flat just wind up being two loosely connected chromatic chords. Then we get C, E and A. This perfect cadence from the E to the A, modulating us to A for the next few bars.
Very, very frightening me.
Now here is another classic Bohemian Rhapsody technique, these cascading chords. So this is a C minor 7 chord that is cascading down. And this chord works really well to move us to E flat major because the C minor 7 chord features an E flat and a B flat. And we then get another one of these chromatic motifs building tension around the 5 chord, around the dominant.
I'm just a poor boy, nobody loves me.
This tension then explodes into this quick succession of chords.
He's just a poor boy from a poor family, sparing his life from this monstrosity.
And then we enter what can only be described as a massive run of perfect cadences.
You let me go. Bismillah. No, we will not let you go. Let him go. Bismillah. We will not let you go. Let him go. Bismillah. We will not let you go. Let me go. We'll not let you go. Let me go. We'll not let you go. Let me go.
Then this string of 5 ones gets broken up by another cascading chord, this time a G flat 7 chord.
Never let me go.
And then we get this rapid string of chords that pass so quick that we really don't get a chance to latch onto the key at all until they finish moving. So let's take a look at this crazy run of chords. So we had 3 perfect cadences in a row, and then we wound up landing back once again in the key of E flat major.
Mamma mia, let me go. Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me.
During this passage, we get a different type of secondary dominant. So the ones we've had before, the secondary dominants we had before, were built on the 2nd degree of the scale. But instead, this time, it's built on the 3rd degree of the scale.
Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me.
And then, wrapping off the operatic section, we land on this B flat, and we build up over the course of 4 bars, setting up a perfect cadence back to E flat that launches us into the 4th section.
For me, for me, for me.
So something that gives this section its sense of forward momentum, its energy, is these triplets.
So
So these triplets are creating what's called a shuffle. And the shift into the shuffle feel is really smooth in this song because we actually started building up into it before the rock section kicked off back here during this B flat. If I isolate the drums, you can actually hear the moment that Roger Taylor shifts from a straight 4/4 to a shuffle fill. And throughout this rock section, the instruments are really pumping into this triplet feel. Listen to how the piano is hitting these chords in time of the triplets. Something interesting I found out about this part here where Freddie sings Die. According to Brian May, originally Freddie was just singing up to the A flat note, but then he wound up taking it 2 notes higher. Also, when I was looking at the stems for this bit, there's a really funny vocal part in there which I've never noticed before.
So you think you can love me and leave me to die?
Now later in the rock section, we start getting a repeating 2/5 chord progression. Once again, building pressure for a big resolution, a big perfect cadence back to E flat. And with that, we've arrived in the final section, the coda section. We're still in E flat major here, although we get a quick succession of perfect cadences in the relative minor of C minor. But then that's cleared up with a perfect cadence landing us back down onto E flat. We then get that other type of secondary dominant we had from earlier, the secondary dominant built on the third, this D moving to the G minor. And then finally we resolve back to an E flat via this plagal cadence, so that's a normal 4/1 plagal cadence. Okay, we're really on the home straight here. We get this very melancholic progression, a long string of minor chords, ending with the most melancholic of chords, the minor version of the 4 chord.
Nothing really matters. Anyone can see. Nothing really matters. Nothing really matters.
I've always really loved this part of the song where the chords are moving so smoothly between each other, glued together by this beautiful line cliche. We actually then get a perfect cadence that feels completely natural to F major. This modulation happened so smoothly because we actually moved around the circle of fifths to do it. We were in E flat, and then we modulated briefly to B flat, and then finally to F major. So by modulating through B flat major, the shift from E flat to F feels really natural. And then finally, we get our trademark chromatic line, this Bohemian motif, one last time. But this time, instead of being stuck in a perpetual pendulum of semitones like before, the last note breaks free, jumping up to where it belongs, resolving onto this F, the root.
With Bohemian Rhapsody, it was basically I was writing 3 songs, and they were meant to be different, and I just couldn't finish them, and I just thought, oh, damn it, I just put the 3 together.
So this video has definitely been the hardest one I've done to date and has taken the most time. There's just so much interesting stuff going on in this song, and it's such a legendary piece of music, I wanted to do it justice. Now, that said, if there's anything I said in this video, any bits of analysis that you disagreed with, please do leave a comment below, because this is a challenging piece of music and I would love to hear different opinions on what's going on. The next video I do is going to be the Q&A that I promised, but I'm still looking for a few more questions. So if you have any questions about me, about my background, about music, please leave them below and I'll do my best to answer them in the next video.
It's one of the songs I had a lot of fun in, because I thought I'm going to do exactly as I please. Do as many multi-layer harmonies as possible. You know, go well over the top. And, you know, didn't give a shit about anybody else.